Pen, paper, movie, check. Then comes one guy you must show respect. When he goes off you all better hit the deck, cause his reviews on YouTube is about to dissect. Oh, don't you know you ain't got a clue? Well in that case allow me to instruct all of you. Make sure you open your eyes and try to stay tuned, cause what you're about to see is a GC review.
Hey guys, I'm going to talk about the brand new season of the show Black Mirror. For those who don't know, Black Mirror is an anthology show, where every episode is its own standalone story. It's basically a modern day Twilight Zone. What unites the episode is that most of them are written by a man called Charlie Brooker. Most of them are pretty dark. They often involve a twist of some sort, and pretty much all of them involve technology in one way or another. I'm a giant fan of the first two seasons in the Christmas special. I enjoy anthologies a lot as a format as it is. But this one in particular, just its excellent writing, great world building, and brilliant social satire. I'm going to talk briefly about the episodes I like and dislike prior to Season 3, just so you have a reference point. One of the most entertaining things about the show to me is that, in its very nature of being an anthology, it lends itself to a discussion about the best and worst episodes, where pretty much everybody you'll talk to has a different order of their favorites. My favorite episode from the first two seasons is 15 Million Merits, for the George Orwell 1984 world that's somehow crossed with Microsoft Kinect. It showcases a great deconstruction of shows like The X Factor. It's got a really good ending that's reminiscent of the movie Network, as well as amazing central performance by Daniel Kaluuya, who really doesn't say much for the entire episode, and then he performs like one of the greatest speeches ever at the end. I'm also a big fan of the Christmas special, White Christmas. That just had loads of little great sci-fi concepts that were told anecdotally within the episode, but they also tie together with the central wraparound story just perfectly, which resulted in one of my favorite endings the show has ever produced. Also, it's got Jon Hamm, which speaks for itself. As for my least favorites, I tend to skip over the national anthem and the Waldo moment. I don't hate them, but I just don't think they're quite as interesting or as well executed as the other episodes. Also, you know, a prime minister having sex with a pig and an obnoxious joke political candidate actually gaining support, you know, that's never gonna happen, is it? So on to Season 3, and this time around we got 6 episodes, which is one less than Season 1, 2, and the Christmas special combined. Now here I'm gonna talk about each episode from Season 3 individually. And I'm gonna keep it relatively spoiler-free because, you know, it only just came out. And I'm not gonna ruin the endings or anything like that of any of the episodes. But some of these episodes are just impossible to talk about without, like, slipping in a slight detail here and there. So there's your warning if you want to go in 100% spoiler-free. So Episode 1, Nosedive, presents a world that's governed by ratings. Anybody can rate anybody else out of 5 stars. It's a little bit like Uber, except your rating controls your social status, and also what services are provided to you. Bryce Dallas Howard plays the protagonist who's trying to climb up the social ladder. And she gets invited to do a speech at the wedding of one of her childhood friends who's like a big deal. And based on the title of the episode, Nosedive, let's just say it doesn't, you know, quite go to plan. The concept of people becoming obsessed with ratings has been done before. You know, there was an episode of Always Sunny where, like, Dennis was freaking out over what ratings, you know, he was getting from girls on dates or something. But more fittingly, there was a famous episode of Community called Meow Meow Beans, which was very similar to this episode, where an app where you rate other people starts to take over the school and then a social system starts to emerge. So with the premise lending itself so well to sitcoms, it's only fitting that this episode was co-written by Michael Schur, who wrote for The Office, Parks and Rec, and I think he writes for Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And it was also written by Rashida Jones. And as a result, this episode does have a somewhat lighter tone. The best way I can describe it is a farcical comedy of errors. But it's also not a flat-out comedy episode. It has a lot of the biting social satire that you've grown to expect from Black Mirror. It takes aim at how false and fake people are, especially on Facebook. You know, people that fish for likes, or post pictures of their food on Instagram just for appraisal. This episode has a great visual design. There's just a really nice look to it. It's cool the way you get to see people's ratings like pop up. And there's a very clever use of pastel colors. One little detail that really impressed me was that throughout the episode you get used to hearing the noise that happens when somebody gets rated down. It's like a brr, 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 brr. And then at one point that little sound effect starts to like remix and get sampled into the soundtrack. I just thought that was a really subtle and clever touch. I really have to commend Bryce Dallas Howard here. You know, she just fully commits to this character. You know, she's got a constant fake smile and she's just trying to further herself by playing up to the conformity of society here. But when things start to go bad for her, you know, I did feel sorry for her. I have to say though, this episode is pretty over the top. You know, it gets very ridiculous and silly at times. Especially the last act, which is, you know, there's a lot of goofy stuff in there. But I think for an episode like this, you know, it almost did need to be over the top to just drive the point home. Also, this episode isn't particularly dark in the traditional sense. In fact, the ending just actually made me laugh, and it's, you know, somewhat optimistic in a weird way. But there is a darkness to it in its depiction of falseness, and it's definitely an enjoyable episode. Next episode is the episode Playtest. The main character here is an American guy who is a bit of a thrill seeker. He's going from country to country and he winds up in England. But he runs out of money, so he shows up to a video game company that are paying people to beta test the new VR horror game. And apparently this game can figure out what your fears are and then through augmented reality, like simulate them in the haunted house that you're in. So this is Black Mirror's take on the horror genre. It's directed by Dan Trachtenberg, who directed 10 Cloverfield Lane, which is one of the most thrilling films I've seen this year. And he definitely does a great job here too. There are conventional spooky things in it. CGI spiders. You got a creepy old house. And jump scares. But what's most effective is the psychological stuff. It plays around really well with what's real and what's not. And then it keeps like subverting it and making you second guess what's going on. That's always a trope that I love in fiction. And it's definitely an episode that plays around with your mind. And despite it being one of the scariest episodes, it's also one of the funniest too. It's not a farce like Nosedive was. There are straight up gags and one-liners here that are genuinely funny. Even the ending, which is dark, is a dark play on words, a dark pun. There are also some kind of funny jokes about horror cliches. And there's also a really well done Bioshock reference that I think might go over some people's heads. The lead actor here is Wyatt Russell, who's Kurt Russell's son. And he nails the dramatic scenes as well as the comedic ones. The character is a little bit obnoxious and annoying at first. You know, he comes on a little strong, but the character grew on me and I liked him by the end. He's also a very well-developed character. Throughout the episode you learn about what he likes and he dislikes and his fears, and you learn about his parents, which, you know, may or may not be important. The episode takes a little while to get going, but the last like 20 minutes or so are just brilliant, I thought. And I was a really big fan of the ending in particular. There's not really so much of a message or a satire in this one as far as I could tell. And in a way the ending is a bit of a punchline, a dark pun as I called it earlier, and it felt pretty Twilight Zone-ish. And I can see the ending annoying some people. And it did work for me, although part of me wishes it did end a little bit more ambiguously. But this episode was a thrill ride. It went places I didn't expect, and it actually really messed up my mind after watching it. I honestly had to take a break from watching the show after this one, because it was just playing around in my brain so much. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. As of right now, it's probably my favorite episode of the season. Although the order is still kind of going back and forth a little bit because they're still so fresh in my mind. On to episode 3, Shut Up and Dance, which is about a teenager who accidentally installs malware onto his laptop, and then via his webcam he gets recorded masturbating. And then he gets blackmailed into doing various things so the video won't get uploaded. This episode, like the national anthem and the Waldo moment, is set in modern day with absolutely no sci-fi. And that usually disappoints me because I think one of the best things that the show does is explore fictional technology. But on the other hand, the lack of sci-fi means that this episode could happen today, which is frightening. I mean, I remember years ago my mom would always tell me to plug out the webcam after I was done using it, just she was afraid that it would like be recording her or whatever. And I always just laughed it off like, hey, don't be ridiculous. And then recently I saw a picture of Mark Zuckerberg with a piece of tape over his laptop's webcam. And I looked it up and yeah, it's a thing. And after watching this episode, I kinda want to tape up my webcam too. This episode is insanely tense. I mean, once it gets going, it just doesn't stop. By the end, I realized how heavily I was breathing, and how fast my heart was just beating, because I just wanted the main characters to be okay. I think the success of this episode is largely because of the lead actor, Alex Lorther. He's a young guy, but man can he act. I was very impressed with him in this episode. And this episode relies on the audience, you know, feeling bad for him and relating to him. And that actor just nails that. I honestly think he probably gives the best performance out of anybody this season. And I also have to mention Jerome Flynn, who I'm a giant fan of, because of Game of Thrones and not his musical career. Bronn is quite possibly my favorite character in Game of Thrones. So I was so excited that he was going to be in Black Mirror. And he does a great job here. He plays another guy that's being blackmailed, but he also has a few little one-liners that remind me a little bit of Bronn, and he adds a slight levity to this otherwise very bleak episode. I also really like the ending. There's a reveal that took me off guard and just really kind of sucker punched me. It's an episode that's morally challenging. It does deal with a somewhat similar theme to an episode from another season, which I won't say because I don't want to ruin anything. But I like this episode better than that one, because I thought the protagonist was a lot more compelling, and I think that episode was only just alright leading up to the great reveal. Whereas this one is just interesting throughout. Also, if you're like me and you heard the premise and you're like, why doesn't he say, fair enough, just upload the video of me masturbating, it'll be embarrassing for a few weeks and then it'll probably just blow over. Especially considering some of the stuff that he gets blackmailed into doing. Well, let's just say that the episode addresses that. And also, as if the ending wasn't bleak enough, they use a Radiohead song in the end credits just to make you feel even more depressed. If I had to nitpick anything about this one, it's that there's a use of a meme that's a little bit outdated in 2016. I haven't seen anybody use it or talk about it in years, so it was just kind of a little bit weird that it was referenced. But that's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. I really like this one. It's relatively straightforward, but it built up tension perfectly and had two excellent performances. I'm kind of back and forth between this one and Playtest as being my favorite, but as of right now, it's a close second. Episode 4, San Junipero, is a sort of coming-of-age romance story. It involves this, shy, kind of nerdy woman, and she's in a club in California in the 80s. And she hits it off with this other woman who's, more feisty. And that's about all I can say right now without ruining it. I have to commend Charlie Brooker for trying something different with this one. A lesbian romance story isn't really something you associate with Black Mirror. But by the end, yeah, you get why it's a Black Mirror episode. It's pretty obvious that it's not going to be a normal romance story set in the 80s and then, full stop, that's it. Once again, the central performances are great. Mackenzie Davis and Gugu Mbatha Raw have great chemistry together and they're just really fun to watch. Especially Gugu. The song choices are worth talking about here too. They're mostly 80s songs. Some of the lyrics are a little bit on the nose about what's going on with the episode if you pay close enough attention. Especially the end credit song when you think about it. It's a little bit cheesy, but I like it when things do that. White Christmas did that too with the end credit song, and it worked there as well. San Junipero is relatively optimistic by the show standards. Usually the show takes a concept or a piece of technology, and then shows you the worst case scenario that this would generate. But this episode doesn't really show a downside to the concept that's introduced. I definitely enjoyed this episode. I didn't love it, apparently it's like the fan favorite of the season. But it's also a nice change of pace here to have a relatively uplifting episode. That being said, it's Black Mirror, so it's not a happy ending, by conventional standards. It's a bit more of a bittersweet ending, but, seeing that the 2 episodes before it were insanely dark, it helps to have one that's not completely miserable. Episode 5, Men Against Fire, is set in the future where soldiers fight against these zombie-type creatures called roaches. The main character is a soldier who gets his first kills on a zombie, but then after that he starts to see weird stuff happening and he doesn't know what's going on. So this episode was pretty disappointing to me. Every season so far has a dud. Law of averages, they're not all going to be home runs. And this is Season 3's weakest link, in my opinion. None of the characters here are particularly compelling. They're pretty much all stock soldier characters you've seen a billion times. There's some fairly cheesy lines of dialogue, particularly near the start. And even the acting here is nothing special. Which is especially disappointing because all 5 other episodes have amazing performances. Although Michael Kelly is pretty good here, even though he has a relatively small role. The twist in this one, it's kinda interesting. It leads on to a certain scene in particular that, was very dark and well done. The only problem is, it's pretty predictable. There's a message here about the state of war today and where it's going, but it's also fairly heavy-handed in that message. So I didn't hate this episode. The ending is pretty good actually, but it also stands out to me as being the worst episode of the season by far if you have to rank them all. Now on to the last episode, Hated in the Nation, which is essentially a procedural detective story. It follows these 2 detectives who are investigating the murder of a woman who's pretty unpopular on Twitter. And it follows them trying to figure out what's going on in this murder mystery type story. So this episode is a detective story, and as a result there's a lot of cliches that come with the genre. For a start you have the hard-as-nails detective paired up with a rookie. Although the fact that they're both women, make it a little bit different. I also got very strong X-Files vibes from this one. The episode involves government conspiracies and robot bees, but I love the X-Files, so that was a plus for me. Kelly MacDonald as the lead detective is very, very good. She's a great character too, with some of the best lines of the season. Faye Marzi as her partner does a great job too. This episode is an hour and 30 minutes long, which is the longest they've ever done. You know, it's pretty much the length of a movie. And honestly, I think that is a little bit too long for what this is. The show has told far more complicated stories in a shorter time before. But at the same time, I can't really think about what I would cut if I had to. The episode gets way more interesting about halfway through. Maybe 40 minutes or so. Because like with the last episode, you kind of see what direction the episode's going. But the mystery does get solved relatively early. And when the characters figure out what's going on, the episode's a lot better for it. This isn't a particularly amazing episode, but I liked it. It's not a bad choice to end the season on. And honestly, this is the first episode that I kind of hope gets a follow-up. You know, I wouldn't mind seeing a sequel next season. Or even, like, getting its own spin-off show. I honestly would just really enjoy seeing these two characters once again solving these, like, futuristic mysteries. So those are my individual thoughts on each episode. As a whole, I really like this season. There's a very interesting variety of genres this time. You got horror, coming of age, war, stuff they've never remotely tackled before. The endings to the episodes this season are particularly good. Although, you know, some are more predictable than others and some have better messages. Men Without Fire is the only one that I would consider a weak episode, but I definitely liked all the other ones. Playtest and Shut Up and Dance are the two standouts for me. But I still like 15 Million Merits and White Christmas better if we're talking favorite ever episodes. I think Netflix is a great fit for this show, having previously been on Channel 4 for the other two seasons. Because now that it's on Netflix, you can just pick and choose whatever order you want to watch. And you don't have to wait a week between each episode if you want to binge them. Although I'd like to advise caution if you are going to binge watch it. Because I watched about 4 episodes in one day, and it really started to take its toll on me. I had a mini breakdown, I just had to, you know, go to bed. So I recommend spacing them out a little bit. I'm just glad that they're still making good anthology shows in 2016. Because good ones are pretty hard to find nowadays. And suffice to say, I can't wait until Season 4. Thanks for watching.